Hey, I'm Nick Ridge. I'm standing in my shop here. You can see a little bit of the model that we did 2 weeks ago in our roof framing class. This was an advanced class, but not a super advanced class. We had 5, I think, people from all over the United States, and it was great. We have 3 or 4 more coming for an advanced class on the 17th of December, which is a smaller model. So anyway, I'm doing another class in about 90 days, which is similar to this one. That has a model that we're going to design, or I'll design, we'll build, and it'll have broken hips and varying plates and a dog leg and so forth. But this class will be by the use entirely of a framing square. That is to say, there'll be no calculators in this one. And if you'll notice, this here is a Martinez square. I just got this recently, happy about it. Very sharp corners and unbendable, and that is you can bend it, but it won't stay bent. Now I have a couple of Shinwa Japanese framing squares. One of them bent, throw them in my truck, try to keep them flat, but throw stuff on top and it bends, you know. And so this one, like I said, is indestructible. Very sharp heel. I use the heel when I lay out stair stringers because I don't use the gauges to step off stairs because it's infamously inaccurate. I snap a line at the heel of the square on the board and then divide it up into the hypotenuse of each individual rise and run, and then make marks on the hypotenuse line that I snap along the middle of the stringer and slide the square along until the heel of the square lines up with a line, and make marks and notch that way. That way, if one of the steps is out, they're not all out, and the stair stringer isn't too long. And I could never really get my stringers perfect until I started doing that, and also using dry wood and different types of engineered wood. You really want perfect stringers. But like I said, I'm doing another class about 90 days by use of the framing square. Now I'm a master of the framing square. That is to say, I spent many years studying this, and it's taught me a lot of things. And I can calculate hips, commons, jacks, bastards, dog legs, you name it, with the framing square and method that I devised, which is a miter ruler, which used to elongate and calculate the ratio between sides of a right triangle, all by the use of some basic math, you know, addition, subtraction, multiplication, but predominantly by way of the framing square. Now, I know my math, I'm a roof cutter, so I use a calculator, but I also use a framing square for level and for various different things. You know, I use templates to mark my heads and my levels and C-cuts and so forth, but I also use this for hips and valleys. I don't make templates for hips and valleys. And this is an incredibly amazing tool. So I'm going to give you a quick little example of how fast it is. Now, if you use the calculator to, say, generate the length of a common rafter and the associated jacks in that span, you would have to set up the framing square anyway. In this case, I'm going to step off a 9/12 pitch common rafter, a really small one, and the associated jack rafters that are in the span there. There'll be 2 hips that go in this little span. I could calculate those out for you just as fast, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to show you the strength of a framing square and how fast you can calculate things. So this particular span is going to be 6 feet, and the ridge will be 1.5 inches. So span less ridge divided in half is the run. 6 feet minus 1.5 inches divided in half is 2 feet 11 1/4. You want to calculate a common rafter. The use of a framing square, we don't measure along the spine of the rafter. We don't know what the rafter length is any more than you would know what the length of a stair stringer is when someone asked you. You would only know the overall rise and divide it up accordingly. So I have no idea what the rafter length is, only the run, which is 2 feet 11 and a quarter. First thing I do, because there's no rafter tail on this particular rafter, is I spin the square. Always spin the square, never flip the square. Spin the square, and that's a tradition because the older squares, if you flip them, you'd find tenths and twelfths that we don't use that often on one side and sixteenths and eighths on the other. So if the heel of the square, and this is called the heel of the square, this part here, is at your abdomen and you step from right to left, eighths and sixteenths will always be up. And the way to remember is like throwing a baseball, right? From right to left if you're right-handed. So in order to get the tail, or the with no tail, that is to say the head cut, the seat cut, level cut, I have to spin it because otherwise it will slide off, and I don't have a straight edge on this particular square. I only have stair gauges, so spin it to get my first mark. Now you can put 2 gauges on, one at 17, 16.9, 7.1, and 12. This will be for hip valley, this will be for common. Right now I am using the 12, making the plumb cut, which is the plate line cut right there. First mark. And then I'm going to step 2 full steps of 12 inches. Slide it up to 12 inches, which is a foot. So 2 feet, 1 foot, 2 feet on the level. And then 11 and a quarter. So a partial step of 11 and a quarter. So I slide it on up. So the stair gauge is at 11 and a quarter, not 12. So just shy of, 3/4 shy of the stair gauge. Make a final mark, and that's your common rafter length right there. That was fast, right? Now, still have to calculate the heel stand. The heel stand, this is the heel of the square, and it's the stand above the heel. In this case, it's 2.5 inches on a 9/12 with a 2x4, 2.5 inches. Spin it, give us our level cut, which is the seat cut, and that's it, ready to cut it out. It's your common rafter. Cut, plumb cut, seat cut, all this goes away. Cut the head cut, fasten it to the ridge, done. Now, what about the 2 jack rafters associated with this? And there's a rule of thumb, if you have an end king common, which is the end of ridge king common, instead of having single cheek cuts on your hips, you have double cheek cuts, so you'll have 2 king commons and an end of ridge king common, and your hips will go in between them. The rule of thumb is to subtract 1 inch. You can do that by just marking the 1 inch on the framing square, sliding it down, and making a mark there. These jack rafters are 16 inches on center, so 16 on the level. Whatever happens on the plate line in plan view happens from the plate line to the side of the hip, right? We got to the side of the hip by subtracting the 1 inch. All calculations, that is to say spans, are from center of hip to center of hip on the other side of the building. We have to get to the side of the hip, that's the 1 inch that we just subtracted. So now we're at the side of the hip, and we're gonna go subtract from the top of the common rafter down. I'm gonna step down 16 inches, which is 1 foot 4 inches. So I make a mark at 1 foot, and then I slide it down to 4 inches, which is difficult with this one because it is only a 2x4. So I use old-fashioned tri-square, 4 inches. Pay attention, my friend, pay attention. Make a mark on it. Slide it down, and then draw a line. And this one I'll circle. No, that's a jack. And then from there, same thing. 1 more step, 12 inches, 1 foot. You can flip it around. Down here, flip it around, right? And then an additional 4 inches using your tri-square. In this case, you know this is 1.5 inches. This side is, this tongue is 1.5 inches thick. So on the inside of the square, 2.5 additional inches will give you 4 inches. circle that one. This common rafter is a template. You'll cut it out and you'll transfer these jack marks along the spine, and you can measure from the bottom of the rafter to the first jack, bottom of the rafter to the second jack. And in that span, you'll have, of course, 2 hips, which means H jacks, 2 rights and 2 lefts of the longer one, 2 rights and 2 lefts of the shorter one, all in the span of about 2 minutes. And like I said, this is a template. This isn't the one you cut. Now you stretch your tape measure from the head cut after you cut this out, or the plumb cut, and to the lengths of the consecutive jack rafters, and cut them out. Found one of these in a roof we tore apart. It was an old 1921 house, and it said Pat on it. And I thought it was the name of the carpenter, but come to find out it was the pattern rafter, and that's what this is. Old school pattern rafter. Give it to your apprentice and have them cut all those. You can do that with a hip too. You can step off one hip, cut it in its entirety, give it to your apprentice and have them cut exactly like that, assuming your apprentice is a little bit closer to mid-level. Anyway, you'll come back with converging side cuts. But there it is, fast. Yep.